Canelo Alvarez has a historic night in Riyadh and once again wins the undisputed super middleweight championship, but historic in a negative sense. He sets the all-time record for fewest punches thrown in a 12-round championship fight, and him and William Scull combined to have the fewest punches thrown in a 12-round championship fight, since being tracked by CompuBox in the 1980s. And what was amazing about this weekend so far that was, concluded the Riyadh season event side of things with Canelo was 3 of those fights wound up being in the top 6 or 7 of the fewest tracked punches thrown in a 12-round title fight in the history of CompuBox. That's incredible to have nearly 50% over the last 40 some odd years to produce that. It's crazy. But Canelo does get the job done. Skull came to survive. This wasn't exactly a good commercial for Canelo Crawford, but I'm going to let you take it away, Raheem. What were your main takeaways from last night?
To be the lowest output in the last, 40, 50 years
Yeah.
on CompuBox is an extreme accomplishment because CompuBox, first of all, overcounts just about every fucking fight. It's a terrible system to receive stats from. And on top of that, somehow, from one day to the next, you manage to set a record for the least output possible. It's a real accomplishment. I don't know how they've managed to do that. These were 2 sleeper cards, man. And I think we may have seen something that is an unintended consequence of some of the things you're criticizing about what's happening in the sport right now, which I, of course, disagree with as far as whether or not it's good for the sport that these fighters are getting the kind of money that they're getting. One of the things, though, that is an unintended consequence of that is guys knowing that they're getting life-changing money for fights that they would otherwise maybe barely, make ends meet for, in the sense of a skull, right? Or school is how he likes it pronounced. There's no way, and I don't know what he's making. The other thing is we all just assume that if you're on a Saudi show, you're being overpaid. And if you're the linchpin of making Canelo Alvarez undisputed once more, and then also moving forward, making the Canelo Crawford fight an undisputed bout, I'm sure he was able to negotiate a pretty purse for his sum of putting that belt on the line and making ultimately what will be a more significant fight come September, an undisputed fight. That said, you'll find that guys will see the money and the risk, and the money is guaranteed, and you don't need to win this fight to continue to eat. Like, you might be able to eat for the rest of your life off one fight's money. The same thing I said about Devin Haney not wanting to take risks for an entirely different reason, it's not about the money for him, is also a reason why a guy who doesn't really believe he can win, but is in a position to leverage his title for a good payday, might do what we saw School do, which is completely stay disengaged, stay on your feet for 12 rounds, make an ugly, boring, nothing fight, a disaster of a main event, but has no future with Riyadh season, is not going to retain that title, is never going to get put into another fight. So get the money and try not to get touched. Hey, listen, I can't beat Canelo Alvarez. I know that. I accept that. But he needs my belt. And I can get this payday and not even get a scratch. And the way that I thought he was so flagrant about it, I wish there was some way to penalize him. I wish you could hold his purse. I said, I was on with Ak and Barack. We did a watch along. I said, if there was any time not to let a guy leave the country, it's this guy. Shut the border down. Take his passport. Make him pay you back for the hotel room and the flight. You know what I mean? Like, if you want to live in a country that has that kind of power, now's the time to flex it. I thought that was a disgrace. Not only was it an insult to Canelo, an insult to the fans in the building, and to His Excellency Turki Al-Sheikh, because I know he got paid and handsome sum of money for that fight, but to the boxing community and the sport at large. that was an absolute stinker, and he done it on purpose, and he had no intention of winning that fight, and he was even putting it in our face, essentially thumbing his nose at the whole thing. And then on top of that, we tipped our hat to him as a community with this outrageous scorecard. I was stunned.
The 115, 113, you mean?
115, 113?
Yeah.
I mean, listen, some of this is on Canelo, some of it in the sense that Canelo should have been able to cut him off. Canelo should have been able to be aggressive enough to make a fight, even with a guy who didn't want to make a fight. It ain't going to be no Triple G Canelo, obviously, if you don't have a dance partner. But Canelo, I feel like, could have done more. He was clearly frustrated. Maybe that's a sign that he's not able to do what he maybe once would have been able to do. I don't know. I can't really say. It didn't make sense to me. I thought, well, at least by the second half of the fight, when we knew what this guy was doing, that Canelo would have been able to make him fight, would have been able to cut him off and batter him up, been able to land more than one shot, even, get him to the body, slow him down, break him down, and embarrass him if he wanted to fight that way. But it really was something. I think if there was any kind of system in place to suspend a guy for like not fighting, this is the case. This is a case to be made for something like that.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack. I want to, because I always want to be fair, and a lot of these fights making history as being so poor. Yeah, it validates some of my critiques about everything going on right now. But at the same time, just to keep it fair, fighters from overseas didn't have the problems, and Ajagba and Bakoli have Bakoli's fought in this environment before, and him and Ajagba still put on a stinker too. The whole card was terrible. Munguia Saras was bad. The Badu Jack fight was dull. But I don't want to put it all on Turkey because the other guys have shown up in his environment and have performed. Fury and Usyk, Beterbiev and Bivol. Many of the fighters on that last card, Beterbiev, Bivol too, they performed. So but something is rotten in Denmark. The common denominator is Turkey Al-Ashik and the environment he's providing. And fighters, you got to watch yourselves here because a narrative is being constructed right now that's going to lead exactly to what would seem to be the goals of Turkey in the TKO group, which are going to launch with Canelo Crawford in September. If that pay scale, which was never refuted, this gets the public on their side. This gets the fans on their side, and using this narrative, which has truth to it, that the fighters being overpaid, it makes them a little spoiled and content, and doesn't have them perform as hungry and as passionate as everybody wants to see it. You guys keep performing like this and keep working with Turkey and you're gonna give them all the ammo they need to do what they got to do to make that pay scale a reality. Go ahead, Raheem.
I also got to take exception to the idea that this is on Turkey really at all. I'm not saying you can't blame him for the way fighters perform. What I said is there is a collateral damage, a particular unintended consequence that is potential. We don't know that this is the case, but potentially a guy coming in and doing what Scull did last night could be a result of him just knowing he's not going to win the fight, deciding he's going to make a fraud of the night and run out with a check. I can't say that this only happens because Turkey Al-Sheikh is at the helm.
Right.
To me, this is a guy running a fraud. And it could happen numerous times if fighters know they can't win, are not willing to compete, which is not a common thing in boxing. You don't usually run up against a guy who's just not going to try to fight and knows he can't win and just try to get in for the bag. We've all criticized that, this guy is just here for the money. But usually you're not talking about an undisputed title fight at any weight division. And this is an anomaly. However, I was just posing a potential reason why a champion would behave that way. And it also, to me, is a bit unfair to put it on Turkey because, yes, he sets the stage for there to be a tremendous occasion. And the fighters then have to make the onus upon themselves, like you said, to perform and show that they're worth the money, that they're worth the value of whatever the purse is. And Times Square, it was a bit of a different thing. I thought Times Square was promoted as an event. So we were critical of how it performed as an event. But even at that event, with the crowd being very awkward and the thing I brought up about who's watching the fight where, all of that stuff is true. And it took away from, I believe, the fan experience. So as an event, I'm critical of it. But I don't think that the boxers can lean on that as well. The atmosphere wasn't what I'm used to, and that gives me the right to not fight at all or to put on a 12-round stinker.
Yeah,
That's
there's
not what
no
I'm saying.
excuse for their
It's just
performances,
contributing
but
to it. And if you're going to criticize, I'd say it is fair game to address whatever issues you have with the event as a criticism of Riyadh season. If you want to put Turki Al-Sheikh at the helm of Riyadh season and say that he's making these decisions and there's something wrong with the event, that is more than fair. We cannot get into a place where you can't talk truthfully about what's going on. We also can't get into a place where you're blaming the promoter or even Turki for how fighters fight. They are being put in the best possible position. And as a champion and being paid, if not overpaid, I would think your mentality would be to go out there and be a champion on the night and potentially do what maybe you don't even think is possible and try to beat Canelo Alvarez. He went into that fight never having the intention of fighting at all. And to me, that is just like the cardinal sin.
I hear you. I hear you, Raheem. But just in my view, this is my opinion, observing these fighters this weekend, I felt like, looking them in the eyes, Canelo after the fight, I think was, my opinion, sad. And Ryan Garcia talked about it, just feeling off, being in this kind of environment. I think because I was saying all money is not good money, and I have a feeling some of these kids, some of these guys are feeling that deep down inside. Just my speculation. I see because for Al in the case of Alvarez, now you see not everything's money. There's something special to those dates that were given to you from the bloody hands of many great Mexican and American fighters. And now you're over in an empty arena with no energy. Just the handling of the whole event in Times Square, it looked awkward for the fighters. In the post fight, normally, you get to get dressed and you get to do your thing and you see the doctor. And these guys were whisked away walking on the streets of New York and quickly huddled into their cars and then almost shoved into their hotel rooms. And you're kind of getting herded like cattle. He's kind of, you could say, oh, my wife put it as, they're working them like whores, like a hooker on payday. All right, perform, chop, chop, get in the ring, get out, go on to the next. And boxing has been lacking some of that organization, being a well-oiled machine, right? So I understand that these shows tend to drag on, and sometimes you're waiting 3 or 4 hours at the post-fight. But basically, I just think a lot of this stuff is the pendulum swinging too far the other way, or sometimes the cure can be worse than the disease, all that kind of stuff. It's not the easiest things for me to articulate. A lot of this is just from my own gut and watching things play out as they go along. And like you said, it's hard to really quantify. How can you blame a man, Turkey, for fighters, grown men, not performing well? At the end of the day, that's on them. But I'd be remiss. 3 out of 6, 3 out of 7 in 40 or 50, in almost 50 years of statistics, almost 15,000 plus fights. And for 50% of them to have happened in 24, 48 hours, Raheem, I don't know how to quantify it. I don't know how to say it, but something's going on here. Something going on. And yeah, a lot of it's on the fighters, but I'm not going to put all of it on the fighters. And I'll say it again, they need to be weary of the narrative being woven against them coming out of this weekend for the long-term implications it could mean.
I mean, the old adage, you're only as good as your last fight. Well, let's, I mean, this might be in this situation applied to His Excellency because we're only a week and a day removed from Eubank Bin, which you and I may have argued about whether or not it was a classic. I say yes, you say no, but what we can't argue
That's
about
a
is whether or
classic
not
in its own right. In its own,
it was a, it
not
was a,
amongst.
it was
De La
beyond the
Hoya
classic
Mosley and
argument,
Trinidad Vargas and Morales Barrera. It
okay,
ain't that.
I'm
In
not
its
looking to
own right.
revisit. I'm not looking to revisit that
Oh,
argument,
right,
but
right,
I
right.
think we would both agree that it was a tremendous event, and that leaving that arena with that event came an incredible amount of momentum that I think rolled us right into New York, that kept us at a fever pitch. That was an exciting, tremendous night. And then in contrast, we have what we've experienced in the last 48 hours. So it's not as though this is some,
But Raheem, one
ongoing
difference
issue.
between these events, Ben Eubank Jr. was really a Eddie Hearn, Ben Shalom event with Turkey Al Sheikh throwing some ends on top of it. These other two cards were his babies. These were really his events. Ben Eubank Jr. was going to sell out 65,000 regardless and was going to be in Tottenham and all that with or without Turkey Al Sheikh.
Now,
He was
the question
along for
is,
the
was
ride.
it going to
And this one,
happen?
he was the driver. In these two shows, he was the driver. He was along for the ride in Ben and Eubank.
Well, I mean, if we're going to get into the weeds like that, honestly, Matchroom did the promotion of Times Square as well.
Right, right. They
Riyadh
handled
Season
a
doesn't
lot
have
of
a
it.
promotion license. They're not doing the day-to-day um, logistics of any of it. So it really is vision. Yes, and I agree with you in the sense that this was Turkey's vision, and I believe he envisioned it more like you would an entertainment event as opposed to a sporting event,
A
as
dirty
opposed
word.
to a boxing event. So the entertainment value is what he was going for. The spectacle is what he was going for. And he created a spectacle, but then the fighters did not perform like actors or Broadway performers or musicians. It's not that kind of thing that you can just come and rehearse and get the same performance night after night. It's a sport. And there's certain elements of boxing that are usually in place that these fighters depend upon to perform as a boxer, as an athlete. And somewhere along the way, what you say, oh, you can't put your finger on it. What I think it is that there was a disconnect between the promotion of the event and the reality of what boxing is and what it requires for fighters to perform in their best environment. So, yes, the environment was awkward. The environment, I don't think, was served what the event was envisioned to be. And at that same time, I put 100% of responsibility on a fighter to fight in the environment that he's in and make it his own sense of pride, his own sense of legacy, his own sense of brand as to how, when that first bell rings, you shut all of that out. As long as the canvas it doesn't have a hole in it and your gloves got cushion on them, you ought to be able to fight. The rest of the atmosphere, yes, can be an issue, but it can't be the reason. And so I think what's happened back to back is that we've looked at event oriented and something that was envisioned as an event, and it didn't really serve the sport. However, last night was not Times Square. It was not an unusual thing. Yes, the atmosphere wasn't electric, but it hasn't been Madison Square Garden, or Tottenham Stadium in Riyadh ever. So that we're accustomed to. I just think the fighters are not stepping up in the moment. And then what we saw in the main event again was like likened to a crime. Uh, and maybe it's because they are less motivated because the money's insured and the money's so good that they're not hungry in a way that they have to perform every time out to ensure that they get another check. Now it's a bit more like playoff season team sports. They just know they got to get a win so they can get in position to be the guy who can get the unification bout. As long as they can keep winning, then they're in a position to be moved down the chessboard. Now, I know how you feel about Dana White, but the irony is that's where a Dana White in his own sport of MMA would step in and not give a shit whether you won or not. If you're not performing well on the night, if you looked bad on the night, you're not getting the title shot. There is no mandatories in MMA or UFC. There is no guaranteed next thing. And that is what I have to credit Dana with. He will make you pay if you embarrass him. If you don't come out there and give the fans what they paid for, what they showed up for, I don't care who you just beat, you're not going to be in the next big main event. He will not reward you for stinkers. And this is also not all in His Excellency's power, because there are sanctioning bodies, obviously, these belts. There's a whole system in place that elevates the winner. I don't think it was fair that Badu Jack entered the ring as champion. Even though he didn't lose in the ring, he did vacate it. Noel McKillian won the championship, in my opinion, by being the mandatory who was sidestepped. Like, to me, and this isn't down to Badu Jack, I love the guy. I'm happy for the guy. I hope he can continue to succeed. But the reality is that what the WBC did there was massive politics. And I'm not sure I agree with the decision. I think a draw would have been fair. And if I had to pick one or the other, I thought McKillian really nicked it, if I'm honest about that. And I saw the look on Suleiman's face after it was almost apologetic to Noel because he knew he got jobbed. Like, this kind of shit, that's not Turkey's fault. That's been the cancer of boxing for a long time. And it's starting to creep in even to Riyadh season. Like, you know what I mean? And these little things, like I said, if I were to be able to ask Turkey Al-Sheikh to create a certain type of legacy, it would be to make a massive impact on what drug testing is like. Let's have year-round drug testing for anybody who wants to participate in TKO or Riyadh season fights. And let's figure out how to get the politics as much as possible out of these sanctioning bodies and hold these judges. If we can't replace them with AI, then let's make them accountable. Let's find out what their names are. Let's interview. Let's have interviews with the judges. Let's make sure that they don't get to judge again if your scores are absolutely indefensible. Like, I think he could have that kind of influence and that kind of power because he's created that kind of platform that everybody wants to fight on. So you create the rules for your platform. You can't tell WBC or IBF or WBO what to do in the sense that you can sanction fights outside of Riyadh season, outside of TKO, but that's not where the fighters want to fight. So use your leverage there and set your own rules. And I understand with this Ring Magazine belt and all that, which has been around before Turkey, but that's another bit of leverage that he has. These are the kind of things I hope that he soon focuses on in the future that could really impact the sport positively, where no one could have a criticism about it.
Back to the fight itself and Canelo thereafter. Again, I said I thought he was sad. I read I thought some of his body language said to me, was this worth it? Questioning the decision he's made.
He wishes he was in Vegas in front of a Mexican audience, defending or at least attaining the undisputed title in the way and the tradition that he had set and that he had picked up the torch for. The question is, would it have happened differently if it were Vegas? Would Skull have performed differently? Would as even as many people have watched it last Saturday if it was just, I don't know who would even promote that. PBC,
Canelo
I guess?
Skull was gonna be shit canned anywhere. It could be in Mexico and they were gonna hate that fight. Maybe he would have done a little better. Maybe at best it would have looked like the Jermell Charlo fight where Canelo was a little sharper and produces a knockdown at some moment. That's your best case scenario. But this was the worst Canelo Alvarez I've ever seen by far. I mean, it almost looked like, he got old. He got old on us over, almost 70 professional fights. The man has made so much money and Canelo, when he's at his best, one of the best front foot defenders in boxing history. He's come, that's Canelo at his best, just constantly. The second Golovkin fight, the Caleb Plant fight, parrying, moving ahead, constant. That used to be why I cut him some slack for his work output, because the man's throwing everything hard and with explosiveness. He's constantly shifting his upper body. And, it takes a lot of energy to fight in that style. So that's why he's not throwing 50, 60 punches around. But, man, this Canelo, he looked like for Bivol and the Golovkin 3 fight and Ryder, he was going downhill. Then he got some juice back for the Charlo and Munguia fights. He turned back the clock a little bit and looked sharp against Berlanga, and then just fell off a cliff by his standards in this fight. And William Scull, I agree. A lot of people, if the guy really tried to fight and tried to win, he might have got himself hurt. Maybe Canelo gets a chance to stoppage. But at a certain point in that fight, when Canelo had grown frustrated and was completely listless and was out of the fight, Skull should have stepped on the gas. He let an opportunity go by the wayside towards the middle and second half of this fight when Canelo was just plodding forward, and he was getting off with his length and his jab and giving Canelo fits. You just step it up just a little bit, and you would have made things that much more interesting on Skull's part. But he did exactly what I thought he'd do. He came to survive. used a lot of that excessive movement, and it worked. And Canelo was flat, which I thought he would be, and he was. Canelo fans better be concerned. I thought heading in, I edged the fight to Canelo against Crawford. I think everybody's changed their pick now. If you, not everybody, a lot of people had Crawford beforehand, but if you had Canelo and you're an objective observer, you probably favor Crawford now, and I do. And speaking of the body language of Alvarez after the fight, as he's looking dejected and a little sad, Crawford, when they met eyes, narrowed his eyes and zoomed in on him like he was looking at his prey. I'm going to eat you. You're not hungry. You're not the same fighter that you once were. Alvarez, being the champion he is, will try to summon it up in the next few months, and he will to a degree. He will be better than he was last night. He will. But how much better? So I saw Alvarez with no fire left in his eyes in that stare down. No fire. And almost like, oh, shit. I felt like shit tonight, and I still got 3 fights to go. What am I going to do? And from Crawford, I just saw a look in his eyes of a killer, of zeroing in on his prey, like a lion ready to eat Alvarez, and saying like, "Oh, I got you now." And like now not only I knew I was gonna beat you, now I know I'm gonna beat you. Like, and it could, and now I think I might be able to stop you because Alvarez has never been hurt really. He's got one of the great chins of all time, but anything can happen in boxing, and when you start to lose that real fire that made you champion with almost 70 fights in, you could get, and I get Crawford's older. I still think this could be I still think this will be an anticlimactic cash grab, Mayweather Pacquiao-esque, right? But what could save the fight is Crawford trying to hurt Canelo and not just turn him and not just win the fight. But if he gets to that point in the fight that I just talked about with Skull, where, halfway through the fight, step it up, Skull, and you could really make something happen. If it plays out like that against Crawford, I think Crawford may try to step it up and really hurt Canelo, really make not just win the fight, but really make something happen. And that could save the fight a little bit. But I still think it's going to be an anticlimactic cash grab. And I think Crawford is licking his lips right now, licking his chops.
I find myself trying to get excited for these fights again. These last 2 nights.
It was easy for me. I never was. So
it was so bad. Like excited for the Garcia Haney rematch. Get excited for Crawford Canelo. I'm not gonna get excited for Eubank Ben 2. I don't think that fight should happen. It really is a roller coaster of emotions because I was far more invested in Eubank Ben than you were, and I came out of that fight with a head of steam. And now I feel like I'm just like a water balloon that has been emptied of all of its enthusiasm. And so it's up to Inoue tonight to save the whole weekend, which is kind of ironic because you have a Japanese fighter on Cinco de Mayo weekend in Las Vegas looking to save the show from Times Square, Ryan Garcia, and a Saudi Arabia Canelo Alvarez. I mean, if I had said this to you 3 years ago, you'd have laughed me out of the room. You'd have you'd have cut this out and made it a meme. Like, it doesn't even sound real. But that's where we are. And I'm not, even as bad as it has been these last couple of nights, I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, because what it is, it's really the advent of a truly global sport. When you put it that way, that's kind of awesome, if only it had delivered. And we've got one more bite at the apple, but it is entirely on Inoue's shoulders tonight.
He will deliver because he's a real one, and his heart's in the right place. He didn't have to come to the United States this weekend. He makes a ton of money in Japan. He can go get a bag in Saudi. He's a Riyadh season partner with Turkey. He's coming to America because it's a romantic mind state. Even if it's, you could argue, passé, coming to America to prove you're the best. His heart's in the right place. It's coming from a place of wanting the glory of the sport. And I think he's going to
also
deliver.
You got to credit Turkey Al Sheikh with this also. I mean, it's not like it's just Inoue is doing this. I don't think he would have done this at all if it weren't for Riyadh season and Turkey wanting to have 3 back-to-back nights, 3
I
main
mean, I don't know.
events.
He's fought in the States 3 times before, twice with Top Rank under the Top Rank banner. So he's fought in the United States. Yeah,
Nothing like on Cinco de Mayo weekend after these two shows, setting him up for what will ultimately believe be a Riyadh season debut for him. Like this is Turkey. This is Turkey for sure.
agree to disagree on that. But
I mean, you think this fight's happening without Turkey on this weekend?
yeah, very well. If Canelo, the way Turkey's responsible for it is by luring Canelo to Riyadh.
Yeah, but
I'll
they
give him the credit
replacing
of that, but
Canelo.
I don't think it's
But
him. Yeah,
but Sean, you got to be fair now because yes, he took Turkey. I mean, he took Canelo out of Las Vegas on Cinco de Mayo weekend. Canelo didn't have to say yes, but we know why he did, and so he did it. And it's not been a great show, but he didn't just leave America or Mexican Americans or Las Vegas in the lurch, which he could have just left it, and he could have easily made that anyway fight the co-main from last night in Riyadh easily. You know what I mean?
I
He
mean,
could have put
Inoue has some
Canelo
say
in.
in this. That might not be Inoue's prerogative. Inoue is the guy who can dance to the beat of his because he has leverage. He's such an economic draw. He can do what he wants.
He is such an economic draw in Japan, but he's signed on to be a Riyadh season ambassador, and
Yeah,
he's coming for the bag. So Canelo has the same, if not more, leverage, but they're not utilizing it because they're on board. So what I'm saying is, this is part of Turkey's vision, and he could have left Las Vegas and America on whole after this, kind of hanging in the lurch for a real, traditional Cinco de Mayo weekend, and instead he put this fight in Vegas, and it's a possibility he could still save the weekend.
I'm not
I
buying
don't
it. This
think.
is because of Mr. Honda and Bob Arum. Mr. Honda and Bob Arum. That's who's
Okay,
putting up. That's who's really putting it down at the T-Mobile tonight.
okay.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I think in this case, both those guys are role players, and they're a part of a whatever. I think Turkey had in his mind some like magic numbers of of threes, the magic of threes. Everything that we've seen this weekend is in threes. There are like three main events, three different fight locations, 3 nights in a row, three major headliners. Like it's all he's got. I think that is part of his whole vision, and thus far it really hasn't performed well. But you're only as good as your last fight, and maybe tonight, if anyway, and here would be the irony: if anyway has like a tremendous performance, is this something that we're excited about tomorrow? We're talking about what a great fight that was. In a way, it elevates anyway in a way that he definitely wouldn't have otherwise been elevated. He would be the one who would get more credit for saving the weekend and get more spotlight and reaction from fans than he would ever is going to get in Japan.
I will just conclude
It's
with this one
possible.
last time. Canelo just should have fought Benavidez.
Yes.